2021 has come to a close, and while I haven't made that many videos this year, I sure as hell played my fair share of games. As such, I figured the best way to come back to YouTube would be to honor that and share with you all the ones that stood out to me the most. Before we can do that though, there are a couple of ground rules I have to bring up. Firstly, I will only be discussing games I played for the very first time this year. So games I revisited, such as Halo 1 and 2, or my regular favorites, Titanfall 2 and Lord of the Rings Online, will not be accounted for. Second, I will only be including one game per franchise on the list. That way I get to talk about more variety of series. To rectify this, I will include an honorable mentions list towards the end of the video, in part recognizing the two I cut out as a result of this rule. Finally, I made a special case to remove Total War Rome Remastered from the list, as while it did make my top 3, it felt unfair to include with the others as it's mostly just an old favorite of mine with updated visuals. Still, I did absolutely love that game and made a considerably in-depth video about it that was one of my least viewed ones this year. So if you want to catch what you may have missed or hear my thoughts, check the info card after this video to give it a watch. Alright, with all those rules out of the way, let's start the countdown. Hey, what is up everybody? This is Blackblade, and these are my top 10 favorite games I played in 2021. I may not have gotten to make the review that I promised for this game, but on the plus side, at least I still get to talk about it here. Metroid Dread was a beautiful return to form for one of my favorite game franchises, proving to everyone that this classic series hadn't fallen to the wayside just yet. I'm more familiar with the Prime trilogy than the 2D Metroids, but nevertheless, it retained everything I adore about the series. Strongly effective atmosphere and visual storytelling, a great ensemble of abilities that make traversing the levels and fighting the native creatures more exciting, and a sense of exploration unaffected by its more linear level design and field of view. Above all else though, I love how this game further cements Samus as the most badass character in any Nintendo property. Yeah, Link is pretty cool too and all, but the sheer ruthlessness and calculated demeanor of hers makes her as cool as most bounty hunters and stories tend to be, while remaining just as heroic throughout. I still have my fair share of issues with Dread that I probably would have gotten more into if I ever finished that review, such as the lack of responsiveness making boss fights less engaging, the absence of secret endings or other satisfying rewards for 100% completion, and the soundtrack being a little weaker than other entries minus that incredible main theme. But despite those things, I still had a lot of fun with Dread, and honestly I'm kinda surprised how much I had to say positively about it despite being at the bottom of today's list. This was just a really solid year for the games I played, as you're about to see. It took 20 years of my life, but I did it. I finally played a game from Rockstar. And honestly, it's probably better I took that much time since I feel a lot of people play games from this studio at too young an age, but hey look, cowboys! Yeah, Red Dead Redemption is every bit the masterpiece I expected it to be, and honestly, I don't know what all I can say about it aside from it's a 10. The graphics? That's a 10. The gameplay? 10s all around. The story? Easy 10, no questions there. The only time this game isn't getting 10s is when I need them to complete a flush because good God, why am I always drawing zip at this table? If I could boil down what I loved about this game to a single aspect though, it's just how immersive it was. I've seen enough from Rockstar to know their biggest strength as a company, at least in regards to their flagship properties, is creating open worlds in their games that feel so lifelike, you easily get lost in them and find yourself spending an entire day of playing doing something you didn't plan to. Like going hunting, or helping some guy get the resources to put together a flying machine that still seems more reliable than United Airlines. Of all the games I played to beat this year, Red Dead was one of the ones I spent the most time in, and that's because I kept getting sidetracked and having as much fun with various little things as I did the base game, something very rare to experience in a game for me these days. I had a great time with Red Dead, and you best bet I have my eyes set on the next one. Even though I've already played a good amount of the online with someone, but that's different, okay? A Plague Tale: Innocence was a game I somehow just completely missed despite coming out a while after the time I really started to pay close attention to trends in the video game industry, to where I saw the trailer for the second this E3 and thought, wow, this looks like a pretty promising new IP. As such, you can imagine my curiosity when I finally learned this one exists, and I had a good time with it, which, I mean, is kinda to be expected if it's on this list, so I don't know why I felt the need to disclose that. This is a good example in my eyes of a game that doesn't particularly excel at any one thing, but does a ton of different things really well. I've always been drawn to the graphics and art direction of games from Focus Home Interactive, and this one is no exception, to the point where it's the first game ever where I actually use the photo mode a fair bit. See, I got this picture, and this one. This one I set as my desktop background, and this was the one I was going to use if I ever decided to make a video about the game. Actually, wait, that gives me an idea. The gameplay I also thoroughly enjoyed, strangely resembling a survival horror game with an emphasis on stealth, despite that genre rarely being used with a middle-aged gothic setting. My favorite thing about this game, though, would have to be the story. I'm a huge sucker for stories that involve escorting a younger character through harsh environments with the protagonist slowly developing a parent or older sibling connection with them. There's this one story that does it pretty well, which you may have heard of before. I don't know though, it's kind of obscure. This game follows that, with a few differences to make it still feel fresh and unique, and I was totally on board with it. The dynamic between Amicia and Hugo was one I fully bought and was interested to see, and all the additional characters I thought were very well done. I might make a full video talking about this game one day, as I think it might be an interesting one to discuss, but for now, I'll just say I had a pretty great time with it and look forward to the sequel. This game has fully cemented Resident Evil as one of my favorite game franchises, because even if I don't think it's as good as 4 or 2 Remastered, it's still the third entry in a row that I've played for this series which just absolutely nailed everything it needed to for me. Resident Evil Remastered, or I suppose I should just call it Remaster, represents everything I love about the 6th generation of gaming, where a lot of big new releases were still very gamey in nature, but now benefited from the technology being advanced enough that the limitations of what within reason could be done in a game were starting to crack. Its level design, controls, story, and general game direction is dated, but in a way I find oddly nostalgic and still think is pretty good. Every other aspect of this game, though, remains spectacular. From its environments, which use stunning pre-rendered backgrounds to still hold up well enough today, to its sound design being extremely effective at establishing a sense of dread before the player even has a chance to grasp what's going on. I love how good it feels to make progress in this game, how your resources truly feel limited and require you to be conscious of how you use them, and as I said, it just takes me back to all the things I loved about the type of games I grew up on. This is the first game I've included on this list that I have yet to actually finish, but don't doubt that I'll be back to finish the job soon. Great game, would highly recommend. Okay, so this is a weird one. I've gone on record saying Halo is my favorite game franchise despite not talking about it very often, but I'm honestly not sure that's true anymore. I reevaluated a lot of things in my life over the past few months, and while it was more about actual personal things like my identity and relationships with people, even littler things like my feelings of different game series had changed somewhat. Now all that said, Infinite is so much fun, you guys. In regards to the campaign, I haven't played enough of it to feel comfortable sharing my feelings about it, but the multiplayer on the other hand, yeah, I can definitely talk about this. Infinite was my most played game this year, finally getting to enjoy the top-notch multiplayer experience this series is initially known for with new and old friends alike. I love how 90% of the weapon sandbox feels absolutely incredible to use, each with their own cool features and fun gimmicks. I enjoyed finding new and exciting ways to dominate the enemy team and not teabag on their corpse because I'm actually a respectable member of society. It's been a while since I've had a game to add to my list of mainstays, despite trying with some to no avail, but honestly, what more can be said? 343 knocked it out of the park with this game, and despite my questioning feelings of where I stand now on the series as a whole, Infinite at least remains my favorite game I played from this year. So hats off to you. Now just work on some of the issues we've all been complaining about and we should be golden, okay? Thanks. Finally, a game I actually talked about this year. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is one of the biggest examples of a game that just feels like a classic in every sense. It's a game that I've only grown more fond of as I continue to think about it, with many things for me to appreciate. A lot of this I've covered in detail with my previous video on it, but I'll briefly touch on here. The movement is fantastic. I love how this series essentially laid the groundwork for the parkour system in Assassin's Creed, and yet, in my opinion, despite its age, it honestly feels more satisfying here due to its level design, having entire sequences like the zoo or prison that are made to get the most from it. I love the mechanics with the Dagger of Time, allowing the game to be incredibly challenging and ask a lot of the player's prowess, while having a unique buffer that kept me from ever feeling like it asked too much or was ultimately unfair. The combat was pretty great, without having to feel like it took cues from specific genres like hack and slash games or action RPGs. Honestly, that's all I really feel I have to say. Again, check the info cards if you want to hear my more in-depth opinions in the full video for it. But yeah, Sands of Time was great, and oh boy am I looking forward to playing Warrior Within and Two Thrones soon, faults and all. GoldenEye, eat your heart out. This is the best 007 game, and you can't change my mind. Unless one of the ones I haven't yet played is better, but you might think this is a joke, the fact that I have a game like this so high up on the list, and honestly, I didn't expect to have this much fun with it either, but Everything or Nothing brought out the inner child in me that reminded me why I continue to find new experiences on the GameCube to play to this day. From a review standpoint, this is probably honestly the weakest game on the list, but not by much. More importantly, it's just plain fun. A third-person shooter with a mix of using cover smartly and going in guns blazing with action rolls and martial arts moves, it just has a terrific sense of energy to it. I love how gadgets like the cloaking device, rappel, and especially the Q-Spider give new and different ways to navigate the levels and challenges that are fun and give an authentic James Bond experience. I love the fact they use the Need for Speed engine for the driving sequences and combine that with the weapons installed in Bond's classic Aston Martin, and you get some glorious vehicle combat to enjoy. I love how all the levels have a rating system, and it's typically determined not as heavily by the usuals like time completed and accuracy, but primarily by pulling often environmentally based stunts or actions called Bond moments that add to the feel of this game being an interactive 007 movie. The story is typical Bond zaniness, giving Brosnan one last hurrah as the best portrayal of the character, don't at me, and Willem
Godspeed Spider-Man
Dafoe as a Bond villain since the film somehow neglected giving us that marvelous prospect. The opening Bond song and accompanying sequence, mwah, perfect. When playing this game, I couldn't help but keep thinking that this is the exact type of game I would have obsessed over if I played it as a kid, and while it didn't blow my mind as much as an adult, I had a great time with it and am not embarrassed to say so. What a game, what a year as a Bond semi-fan. Portal 2 is a game that I absolutely without a doubt want to apply my standard review format to sometime in the future. This was a treat, taking everything I loved about the first game and cranking it up to 11. GLaDOS is just as amazing a character, in fact honestly better than she was in the previous one, and Wheatley is a wonderful new addition to the cast, who I was originally worried would just be typical quirky British man type humor, but I found to be a little more nuanced and interesting than that. The story, excellent. I love how natural yet shocking the various twists you discover are, and that ending with the credits song is just the icing on the cake. The environments,
fantastic.
The deterioration of this facility from your past actions shows here, and it does a lot for this game's atmosphere, which you know is a big thing for me in games. Of course though, the main thing of note with this game is the quality of the puzzles. They give you a brief refresher on things you may have forgotten or missed from the first game, and then take you on a ride with several new mechanics like the blue and orange gel, forcing you to get creative, use your brain, and apply yourself. Side note, I watched Breaking Bad for the first time this year as well, and it's an easy 10 out of 10 show. Absolutely loved it, and if it were a game, I'd include it on this list. I've heard many consider the Portal and Half-Life games to be the best of Valve's repertoire, and while I have yet to play the Half-Life games and expect to enjoy them immensely, it'd take a lot for them to top this in my eyes as my favorite game they ever produced. I think I've made it clear in the past that God of War is my favorite PlayStation exclusive franchise, even if it may not be fully exclusive anymore. But if I were asked to choose a second favorite, I think I'd be pretty comfortable in saying Infamous. The first game was something I wanted for quite some time before and since, offering an environment for you to be a comic book superhero-like character, patrolling the city, stopping the big baddies, and saving civilians you come across in danger, in a game not linked to existing superheroes from Marvel or DC. As such, I went into the second, hearing from people that it's not as good, but honestly, I just flat out disagree with this sentiment. The story is a little weaker, but in every other way, Infamous 2 in my opinion is just a direct upgrade from its predecessor. The combat is more what I hoped from the first game, having a unique mix of melee and ranged combat, each with a good amount of depth and cool abilities making use of Cole McGrath's awesome power set. I love how it feels traveling through the city, with classics like grinding on the train rails and wires and using your electric powers to somehow glide through the air, but also some new talents like launching yourself upwards with an ice spike or grappling between rooftops using a long strand of electricity. Again, somehow. The story, as I said, isn't as strong as the first games, but it's still pretty good. And this, in my eyes, is one of the best instances of a game having a morality system, since as the plot unravels, more merit is given to either side you choose to take. This was one of the first games I played this year, hence why I can't share things with the same level of detail, but despite that, holy crap, I loved this game, and hope they revive this series because I want more. So much more. Alright, before I get to my favorite game I played this year, I'd like to make a few honorable mentions. First up, we have The Division 2. This game barely even cracked the top 20 for me out of all the stuff I played this year, but I felt I should still include it because of how much it caught me off guard. These days, Tom Clancy games are often seen as the white noise of the video game industry, but Division 2 shows that these games could be so much better with just a little more effort and creativity. And it just fills me with delight that the team that made it is one of the ones I have a higher chance working with first after graduating based on their office location, as this game and the improvements it made in response to feedback from the first shows how much this studio cares about their end product. Next, I'd like to shout out Little Nightmares and A Way Out. These are two games that literally just missed out for making the cut, at 11th and 12th respectively. But fortunately, they're both games I talked about already this year, so you can see what I had to say about them there. Doom Eternal was another great game I played this year and wanted to talk about, but didn't really get a chance to. I thought it was just slightly weaker than 2016, but regardless, there's a lot to like about it, and the fact it's still getting big content additions today is just wonderful to see. The first Portal is a great game that turned what may have been just a simple physics experiment the developers bundled in with the Orange Box into one of the best puzzle games ever made. As the last game I can say this for, I did talk about it in its own separate video earlier this year, so if you want to hear more, check it out there. This leaves us with the final and biggest honorable mention, God of War Chains of Olympus. I played through all the spin-offs of the series earlier this year with the intention of making a follow-up to my video on the original trilogy, and while it didn't come to fruition, I wanted to briefly say despite the other two spin-offs still being enjoyable experiences to me, yes, even Ascension, Chains of Olympus very clearly stood above them in my eyes, giving exactly what I'd expect as a pocket God of War experience. It has great level design, fantastic combat, and some wonderful new enemy types, abilities, and boss battles to make this entry in line with the main ones. This would have easily made the top 5 if it weren't for the one game per franchise rule I set beforehand. Wait, that doesn't make sense though. I haven't talked about God of War in this video. It's everything I wanted and beyond. You know how I said earlier I was considering whether Halo was still my favorite game franchise? That's because this game made me realize the series had become genuine competition for that spot. God of War 4 is a game I've been waiting to play for 3.5 years, always unable to due to my lack of owning a PlayStation 4. Luckily, I finally snagged a PS5 this holiday season, and you best believe it was the first game I played on the new console. I've said a lot of great things about a variety of different games today, but God of War 4, 2018, whatever you want to call it, is one of the only games I've played that I can say is exactly the type of experience I want. An action game with meaty, satisfying combat mechanics offering enough variety and moveset for flair and personal expression, a healthy amount of side content that's high quality and actually engaging and satisfying to pursue while remaining fully optional, a proper level of difficulty that I found challenging but reasonable on hard mode, and all the while telling an engaging story that feels powerful and emotional regardless of whether it has anything terribly profound to say, which even then I'm not sure is true. Every box that I could think of for what makes a game fun or a favorite of mine, this game checks off. I honestly can't even begin to summarize everything I love about it, and trust me when I say it's getting at least one video of its own once I've completed it. For now though, I'll just say it's genuinely the most fun I've had with a game in an unspeakably long time, and I am proud to call it my pick for my favorite game I played in 2021. So that's my list, and hopefully I was able to capture at least some of the great feelings that I had playing these games and sharing them with you all. I've got a lot on my list to play in 2022, both new and old releases alike, that I'm fairly excited for. So while it may be a crazy year all things considered, here's hoping that at least in terms of games, it proves to be as much fun as the last one was. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to slice that like button in half, subscribe to my channel if you are new, and let me know what your favorite games you played this year were and why. I know it hasn't been an easy year for many people, so some positivity about our shared hobby would be a good way to reflect on it some. Speaking of this year being difficult, I decided in making an update video to catch anyone who's curious up to speed to post it on my second channel where it won't get in the way for those who aren't necessarily interested. There should be a link for it on screen now, so give it a watch if you'd like to know where I'm at, both with my life, the state of the channel, and how I plan on going forward with both. Anyways, once again, hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.